I'd like to talk a little bit about the basics of economics. Economics is the study of scarcity. What do we do in the presence of a limited supply of something? Now, according to economics, there are four things that are scarce, four factors. The first factor that is scarce is individuals. There's only a certain number of individuals that exist in an economy. That's a scarcity. You can increase that number a little bit by taking people who aren't in the workforce and making them come into the workforce. Those who are retired can enter the workforce. Those who are too young to currently be in the workforce can be forced into the workforce, so on and so forth. But there's still a finite number. There's a limited number of individuals that exist in the workforce. That's the first scarcity that's there. The second scarcity that's there is the amount of natural resources. That would include the land, and everything below it and everything above it. We only have so much land, so much natural resources that we can actually use. There's only so many trees, there's only so much air, there's only so much water, there's only so many things that are there, so much ore that's in the ground, and oil, and so on and so forth. So the second scarce resource in an economy is the natural resources. The third scarcity is capital, the amount of money and investment that can be made. That money can be in terms of training for my workforce, it can be in terms of supplies, it can be in terms of buildings, it can be in terms of equipment, CNC machines, lathes, things like that. So if you look at it, those three make sense. If you look at any economy, there's only so many people that are in it, there are only so many natural resources that are there, and there's only so much money that can be invested in it. The fourth scarcity is entrepreneurship. And entrepreneurship at the beginning doesn't look as if it makes much sense because everybody has an idea. But the problem is that there are only so many good ideas, and there are only so many ideas that people really truly follow up on. Everyone's had an idea at some point in time that they think would be a fantastic business, but they haven't done it. So only so many people really know what they're doing and can actually do it right. Entrepreneurship, defined, would be the other three resources used in some combination that no one else has done before. So I'm finding a way to do a business at a location that no one else has done before, or using a different set of people or investment machines, so on and so forth. So when you look at it, and the fact that there are really only so many good people that are successful at it, you can understand why entrepreneurship is indeed the fourth one. So the four scarce resources that we have that control everything else would be people, natural resources, investment/capital, and entrepreneurship. So those are the four things. Now if we look at econ, it can be divided into two major categories, macro and micro. Macro econ is a look at everything as an aggregate overall. So how do markets perform? Micro is a subset of that. Micro is looking at it from how does a firm operate, how does a corporation operate, how does a government operate, how does something smaller than the overall piece operate in a small market? That's microecon. We can break it down further and say within microecon there's managerial econ and labor econ and different categories that exist there. But the two major categories are the macro and the micro. And you'll find that what happens in the macro will affect what happens in the micro. And what happens in the micro, how different organizations and companies interact, will affect the macro. So it goes both ways there. But there are 6 principles that we need to keep in mind whether we're looking at any form of econ, macro, micro, so on. The first major principle is this: people face trade-offs. Every time you decide to do something, you're deciding not to do something else, or some things else. So people face trade-offs. When I decide to go to school and spend my money on that, it means that I'm choosing not to spend my money to go study wildlife in Antarctica, or not go on a cruise, or not do something else. What I'm giving up when I do something, and have that trade-off, is called an opportunity cost. The opportunity cost is the cost of the next best alternative. So when I buy a book with my $60, I'm not spending that $60 to take my family out to dinner. There are lots of other things that I could have spent that $60 on, but the next best alternative to the book is taking my family out to dinner. So trade-offs always involve an opportunity cost. What is it actually being given up? The second thing to know about econ, or second main principle, is that rational people will always tend to think at the margin. which means that the benefit that they get from something needs to exceed the cost. They're always thinking rationally. What's in it for me? What can I get out of this? If it costs me more to do something than I'm getting out of it, then most people, rational people, won't do it. So rational people will tend to think at the margin and tend to behave accordingly. That said, we come to principle number 3, which is that people respond to incentives. If you want them to do something, you can incentivize them. I can give you money for doing it, and you're more likely to do it. If I want you to stop doing something, I can give you a penalty for doing it. So I can tax you. And if I tax you, you'll stop doing it. So we can subsidize something if we want people to do it, and we can tax something if we want people to stop doing it. So people tend to respond to incentives. Now sometimes those incentives come in ways that we weren't really thinking about and planning on. An example of that would be seatbelts. Years ago, you did not have to wear a seatbelt when you're driving your car. But lots of accidents were occurring, people were getting hurt, people were dying, and so most states passed laws saying that you had to wear a seatbelt restraint when you were in a vehicle. So they started requiring car manufacturers to put seatbelts in. Makes sense, and in fact, it turns out that people were wearing seatbelts, they would get a ticket if they didn't, and so on and so forth, and you were making them safer. So that was indeed happening. An unexpected consequence that no one had planned on was the fact that when people are wearing seatbelts, they do feel safer. So think about the car that you're sitting in. You're sitting in a car right now with a seatbelt on you. You've got airbags all around you. You've got all these protection things that are there. And so you start driving faster than you otherwise would. So people are responding to these incentives, which is a natural thing to do, but not in ways that were thought about before. They're driving more dangerously than they previously were because they feel safer than they previously did. The seatbelt law was a good thing, but the unintended consequence of that was that now people are getting in accidents at higher speeds, which is causing them to still get in dangerous situations and harmed and so on and so forth. One other example that I will point out there is in that vehicle. Imagine in the car that you were driving, if the news released an announcement, let's say you drive a 2010 Malibu, and they released a press release, and the press release said that all the 2010 Malibus were being recalled. The reason they were being recalled is because back when they were being manufactured, there was a crazy individual working at the factory. And that crazy individual was responsible for putting together the airbags. But, being crazy, what they did is they did not put the airbag in the steering column. Instead, they put a steak knife. Now, that individual only worked on 100 cars. So out of all the 2010 Malibus that are in existence, and we're talking hundreds of thousands of them that are out there, there are 100 of those that actually have a steak knife in the steering column. And if you were in an accident, instead of an airbag coming out and protecting you, the steak knife would come out and go right through your forehead. The odds are quite good that most of those 100,000 individuals would slow down. And they would start driving much slower until they got to the auto dealer and had them look at their vehicle and prove, verify, change, whatever, authenticate that there was not a steak knife in the steering column, but in fact there was an airbag there and that everything was okay. So only 100 people would truly be affected out of the 100,000 or so cars that are out there, but it would affect all of them. Everyone would be thinking about that and responding to that. So we do indeed respond to incentives, and we do tend to think rationally when it comes to that. Fourth principle is that everyone can be better off when trade is involved. Trade can make everyone better. Now we tend to look at it and we tend to say that's a terrible thing. Trade's terrible because my job is going overseas and there's nothing made in America anymore, and so on. So we tend to get our hackles up and get quite defensive about that and not realize the benefits that are there. If you look at what's happening, we are manufacturing and creating things at the cheapest location that we possibly can, which makes our dollar go better. As a result of that, as a result of having to not create my own shoes and not create my own food and not create my own everything, as a result of the fact that I can depend on all of that to be there, I am able to specialize in something. Specialization is only possible when it is assured that someone else was taking care of everything else and I don't need to worry about my basic needs. So the needs for everything else that I have are taken care of by trade. I can make money by specializing in what I do that I can then use to buy my shoes and my food, and my other needs are met there as well. So overall, from a macro standpoint, trade makes everyone better off. One of the problems we have with interpreting that is that when we look at it and we see unemployment, unemployment may be a small number, it may be 5%, and that's a good thing, unless it's you. We tend to look at that and we see that as being a personal thing, and it's very bad for us. We don't realize that there are all the beneficiaries of the trade which are able to get things at a cheaper price. So it's very hard to be objective when we're looking at it, but from a purely objective standpoint, trade does make everything better off. Which brings us to point number 5. Point number 5 is that markets are a good way to organize activity. Rather than me having to worry about taking my specialization and finding someone who will give me food and someone who will give me this and give me that, by using a market structure, I'm able to get paid for what I do, and then take that pay, which in this case turns out into dollars, and use those dollars to buy the things that I need. So as a general rule, markets are a good activity because it allows us to put things into general terms and go with a common denominator, money in this case. The final thing that everyone will tend to agree on, most economists will tend to agree on, is that governments can sometimes make markets better. Now, as a general rule, we want to leave a market alone, let everything take care of itself, ceteris paribus, meaning leave things alone, all things as they were, and such as that. We want to have this invisible hand that controls the market, the Adam Smith theory. So things just tend to take care of themselves, price, supply, demand, and such. But sometimes there are some situations where that doesn't work out and we need the government to get involved. So sometimes the government can help. Typically, the government can help when there are externalities, when not everything that should be taken into account is being taken into account. The government can look at it and say that this party over here, which is not buying or selling, not a part of this, but they're affected by it. They're affected by the smoke, they're affected by the water pollution, they're affected by those things, and they can step in and they can act on their behalf. So the government can sometimes make things better off. In most cases, they're better off staying out of it, but there are situations where that can be the case. So those are 6 things, 6 principles that almost every economist will agree upon, whether we're talking about things from a micro or macro standpoint. Let's move on now and let's talk about goods. Goods are what we buy. And there are a number of things that we want to look at with goods. They typically fall in several different categories. The first thing to know about goods is that they can be classified as being either normal goods or inferior goods. A normal good is something that I buy more of as my income goes up and less of as my income goes down. That's a normal good. That good is tied to income. So the more I make, the more I buy. The less I make, the less I buy. That's a normal good. An inferior good is something that I buy only because my income is down. As my income goes up, I buy less of it. An inferior good for me would be Campbell's chicken noodle soup. I buy Campbell's chicken noodle soup and I bring it to work and I eat it for lunch. I eat it for lunch because my income isn't as high as I would like it to be. If my income would go up, I would buy less Campbell's chicken noodle soup and I would buy more of something else. It's something that's helping me right now, but not something that I prefer. Other things that I prefer would be movie theater tickets. Movie theaters are a great place to go and watch brand new movies when they come out. I love going to the movies. If my income goes up, I will go to more movies. If my income goes down, I will go to less movies. So movie theater attendance for me is a normal good. Campbell's chicken noodle soup is an inferior good. If you look at an algebraic equation, you will see lots of different variables that factor into a good about the demand for it, whether it goes up, whether it goes down, so on and so forth. In this case, to decide whether something is a normal good or inferior good, the only thing that you're going to look at is you're going to look at the income portion. Forget everything else. If it's a positive relationship, the quantity demanded goes up when income goes up, it's a normal good. If it's a negative relationship, that the quantity demanded goes down as income goes up, it's an inferior good. So that's the easiest way to tell the difference between a normal good and an inferior good. There is a small subset of goods that are known as superior goods. Superior goods are goods that you only want once your income reaches a certain level. So when you're making $20,000 a year, you don't want it. When you're making $30,000 a year, you don't want it. As soon as you reach that magic number, you start wanting that good. Everything below that, you don't. For me, a superior good would be porterhouse steaks. I don't want porterhouse steaks right now because I can't afford them. But if my income would double, suddenly I would start wanting porterhouse steaks. In fact, I would use porterhouse steaks to replace that Campbell's chicken noodle soup. That would become my new lunch each and every day. So I would start eating those. Things like tickets to the ballet. You don't want tickets to the ballet when you don't have enough money to live on. So you need to wait until your income reaches a certain point. Those are superior goods. Some economists believe superior goods are there, others just put them in the normal category with a really low number. Just know that superior goods are goods you only want once you reach a certain amount of income. Two other categories that goods can fall into would be that they are either substitutes or complements. Not every good falls into this category, but sometimes they do. A substitute is a good that can replace something else. And so if I'm buying one thing and the price of it goes up to where I don't like it anymore, I will buy the other good. It just simply replaces what I was buying. An example of a substitute good would be, instead of buying blue ink pens, if the price of blue ink goes up, I will buy black ink pens. I have no real preference between the two. I buy blue ink pens because it stands out when I sign a piece of paper. But if the price of blue ink goes up because something is crazy about it, I'll buy black ink. They're completely replaceable, one for the other. There's nothing there magical about them. One serves the same purpose as the other. That's a substitute good. A complement good is something that you buy only because you're buying something else. Because I'm buying one item, I buy another item. An example of a complement good would be stubs for tires. So when you buy new tires, you typically get I can't recall what they're actually called, but you put the air into it, the air fill tubes that are there. I only buy those because I'm buying new tires. I'm not buying them typically on their own unless somebody, valve stems, that's one, I think it was valve stems. So I only buy valve stems because I'm buying new tires. Without buying new tires, I'm not going to buy new valve stems. So valve stems are a complement to new tires. If there's a special sale or prices go down or whatever the case may be, and people start buying a lot more new tires, they're also going to buy a lot more valve stems. So the demand for valve stems is tied to the demand for tires. If a large chain, Goodrich or Goodyear, any one of those, if they would run a special on tires, there would be an increase in the demand for valve stems. If someone would run a special on valve stems, it wouldn't go the opposite way. You wouldn't suddenly have people buying more new tires. One of the reasons for that is because the valve stem is such a small portion of the cost of the tire that it doesn't affect the purchase enough. So valve stems are a complement to tires. Tires are not necessarily tied to the same relationship with the valve stem. Same thing could be said for ice cream and ice cream cones. If you run a special on ice cream, you'll sell a lot more cones. If you run a special on cones, you won't necessarily sell a lot more ice cream. One does not generate the same demand with the other as the other does. So it doesn't go both ways at the equal proportion there. Goods fall into that category sometimes. There are other goods that we buy that there's no substitutes for, other goods that we buy that doesn't matter, or there's no other substitutes that we would take. We won't do anything other than that. One of the goals of advertising is to convince you that there isn't a substitute for this product, that you have to have this product and this product alone, that you can't just buy tennis shoes, you have to buy Air Jordans. If I do enough advertising, I can convince you that Air Jordans are in a category all by themselves, and that there is no substitute for them, and you won't put up with anything else. And that's one of the goals of advertising, is to be able to do that. It would be perfect from a marketing standpoint if you could do that with every good and convince people not to buy anything else. Convince them that your drugs are the only things that work, and not to accept generics and not to do anything different, but to only demand your product. That's been a few of the categories there. We've looked at the 6 different things related to econ. We've also looked at some various associated things along with goods. We'll stop at this point for this lesson.